Slow down. Lay your burden down.
Hey, welcome to Divergent Paths with Dan Dunford. I am your host, Dan Dunford. Happy day after Valentine's Day. I hope you had a delightful time with whoever that means to you. Yeah, it's a good day. It's a good day. This week on the podcast is my good friend Chris Misch-Blaxdorf. He is a wonderful trombone player and very talented composer and band leader. Met him playing with Sarah McDonald's New York Philharmonic, and we hit it off, and he's a really nice guy. Played with him, hung out with him on a number of occasions, and I love his music, so I thought I'd talk to him about it. And we covered a lot of cool stuff. So I hope you enjoyed that. Back in December, well, first, we recorded this in November, right before the album release show for Chris's album with his band. So we talk a lot about that show. And one thing led to another. We didn't end up, I didn't end up releasing it until now, with Chris's permission, of course. And so I thought about cutting out the part about the show, but he talked about it and talked about putting together some different interesting things, just highlighting all the things he does do as a musician, and it was really interesting. So I left it in, but that happened back in December, and that's when he released his album, which is called Snapshots. And obviously, as is my normal practice, we'll be featuring a track from that album on the podcast at the end. There's a track called "A Shared Office with Superman." So yeah, if you like it, look him up. He's just got really cool stuff, and he's a great guy. And maybe just hit him up and say hi. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If you want to see me play, well, don't have any concerts this week, but whatever. Should be starting a production of Carmen for Venture Opera this week. I'm really excited about that. Got some other stuff coming up, but yeah, that's basically it. So listen and subscribe. If you like the podcast, share it, write a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Let me know what you think. My email is divergentpathspod@gmail.com, or Twitter @divergentpod, or on Facebook, Divergent Paths Podcast with Dan Dunford, or something like that. Yeah, thanks as always to my wonderful producer Trevor, who is awesome, and who I haven't seen in a week and a half. That's unusual. But anyway, enjoy your week, guys. Bye.
Slow down.
Anyway, so let's talk about you. And less about everything else. So you have... Does your ensemble have a name?
No, man, that's it's actually the worst.
You're trying to book things and you're just like, it's my friends.
Yeah, and that's kind of what it is. And it's trying to have this presence of it's a band, but then it has my name at the front of it, which is I don't really like. But I also think the name is kind of an important thing. I think that a really good name obviously kind of encapsulates the band and what the band's about. In addition to also, I feel just being catchy, just having something for people to like kind of latch onto. So I kind of played around with a bunch of different things, and like nothing really set. And I like would text. I had like this like kind of ongoing thing with some of my friends who like, yo, like what about this? And they'd be like, yo, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, or something like that.
Well, but the weird thing is that sometimes with Sarah, like the New York Philharmonic thing started as a joke, and the first time I heard it, I thought it was a joke, and then it just kind of stuck, and it fine.
Works.
Like it works. Like now
totally.
I don't think it's dumb. I think it's kind of clever, because you're in New York, and that's like the Philharmonic is a recognizable brand. Yeah, and being able to play around with that is cool.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one of my friends had this thing. He was like, you should call your band Not Jazz. He's like, because jazz is having an identity crisis, and also it's a pun on hot jazz, which is hilarious.
It's pretty nerdy.
So I was like, yeah, maybe. But then like everyone would also like hate me for like having that.
Chris is not jazz.
Yeah. It's like if you want to like ostracize people even more from potentially experiencing something that's kind of jazz, like that would be a good way to like maybe, keep a whole audience outside of that basis.
Yeah. So it's funny, like when I started doing this show, I assumed I was like, my contact list is now good enough, and I can grab people that I know, and then those people can help me, can put me in touch with other people. I mean, like, or I'll meet people. I was just kind of like, but I was concerned about having like starting out and then having like 5 trombones, five weeks in a row with trombonists, and being like, oh no, this is becoming
too much trombone.
This is too much. I need to space them out. But it turns out, and I actually ended up the first 2 episodes I recorded were with trombonists, and I was like, oh no, I need to space these out. One of them I ended up not releasing for a couple of reasons, but but just worked it out with the guy and was like, well, we should redo this kind of a thing, and so it ended up being like I'm 4 months in almost, and I've only had 2 trombone players, and I'm like, oh, I guess it's not that much of a problem. So now you're here. I mean,
we can trombone out, man.
You'll be number 3.
This will be our thing. Trombone hang.
You and Dave Whitwell and Will Lang.
I'm not sure if I fall into the same category as those guys, but I'm gonna try to hang as much as possible.
Do your thing. So. I've played with you on a number of occasions. So you're obviously a really good trombone player.
Thanks, man.
But it seems like a lot of this, and you do a lot of, you play a lot. But it's when I was speaking to a couple different people about having you on, it was more of like they were talking about like the stuff that you write and like how like the interest based on that, kind of like you're developing an identity not only as a trombone player but like also as a composer and a kind of like a ersatz band leader of sorts. And so when did you start like doing, deciding to like write your own stuff? Has that always been a thing you do, or?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess even from the get-go, trombone-wise, when I kind of started playing, I was obviously like in band and stuff like that and had like the normal route. But as far as like composition was going, I started playing in like ska bands when I was growing up, like in high school and stuff. So maybe like initially some of those horn lines. And then when I got into undergrad, I had this really, really great lecturer, educator, jazz educator, composer. This guy named Fred Sturm, who's kind of really known in the Midwest, but known out here too. He was one of the faculty members at Eastman for a long time, but taught at my undergrad at this place called Lawrence University. And he really just got me into stuff like big time, really heavy as far as writing. But I didn't really think that was necessarily what I wanted to focus on. I took this composition class with him, which was really intense. He had to write like a non-ep first and then write like a big band chart. And then it was like every single week you were writing tunes based off of certain composers. Like one week would be like Wayne Shorter tune, or one week would be like a Monk tune. So you'd like study that person for a week and then you would bring in a tune based off that person. But then I just had kind of like this jumble of a bunch of different things happening. So then when I came out to New York, I did my master's at NYU. I studied under Alan Ferber. That was like my guy. He's kind of the whole reason I came out here. And he was basically, he kind of just let me do whatever I wanted to do, I guess, compositionally, which is how, I feel how an educator should be for composition. Kind of just like let you do what you want to do.
Composition teaching is a weird thing.
Yeah.
Because like you go and study with this person. Like I'll use the example of Manus because that's what I'm familiar with and I know those guys. But like these guys have made a name for themselves, doing this or that or the other thing, and you go and study with them, and if you don't want to do that, like what? Well, I mean, how much are they going to help you? So like if they're not going to let you do your own thing. I've always been confused about how like in a conservatory setting how a composer really teaches, like especially in the 21st century where it's not you're not teaching people how to replicate
your
Brahms,
style or something.
or if you're not teaching them how to replicate Brahms, like and like using that as your template. What is exactly that you're teaching them? Yeah,
exactly. And that's, I think Fred, he was definitely coming from that style where it was like, he very much talked a lot about like studying Bartok and studying all these really heavy classical composers and having to write string quartets and orchestras and all this stuff when he was doing his masters. And so I think when he was having us model our small group charts after like each of these jazz composers, like I was saying, he was kind of following that same kind of format, but with Alan, it was very much like I came in with this idea that was like, okay, I really like contemporary classical music. I love that so much, and I also love jazz, and I think there's some things that both can offer. Like I really like the fact like a rhythm section in jazz is like a very unique thing because it kind of allows almost like a crossover between like rock, a crossover between a lot of different genres. Or like a lot of contemporary classical groups, if they don't have any kind of percussion or things like that, they like propel that through rhythm or something like that. But it doesn't have the same kind of like edge sometimes. And
it's a struggle to like write for those in a way that the performers will not hate you for.
Which has definitely been an issue.
Like, what are you doing? Like, what am I supposed to hit on this beat? Like, what are you trying to tell me?
Yeah, exactly. And it was like an interesting thing. So like when I first had this ensemble, which is like the 10-piece group, it was kind of like combining these two elements and seeing what I could kind of come up with them. Like I like being able to have like the really quiet and like intimate kind of like almost like chamber group aesthetic, but then like eventually being able to expand into like these very large either like rock or metal or hip hop kind of vibe tunes at some point within the evolution of the composition. So someone like Alan, like going back to that, like Alan is someone who definitely his music kind of borrows from a lot of different areas too. So he was definitely very willing and happy to kind of let me develop my own voice in that setting.
The interesting is like when you're talking about your studies at Lawrence, like that idea of especially with because jazz encompasses so much after 80 years or 90 years, no, like 100 years of it being like a like very important American art form. It encompasses so much from like you've got your swing, you've got your Latin jazz, you've got your bebop, you've got your post bop, you've got your fusion, you've got like
exactly.
Like there's just so many things, and each of those requires a very specific style. And it while it might all be in your finale jazz font, but it's like but it's a completely different thing. So like the idea of okay, this week you're writing a monk chart, this week you're writing it's kind of like filling up a toolbox that you can use to and you might just like one specific drum riff that Monk uses, and you might like a piano line that fucking even go back further like Jelly Roll Morton or something like as far back as that. Like you can take all these things and be like a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and then you have your own thing kind of. I heard someone say that there's a lot of similarities between like the world of stand-up comedy and the world of like freelance musicianship. And I heard one comic say one time that before you can develop your own thing, you have to try on your heroes. Like that's when you're starting out. That's what you do, and then you're like you mold things into what it takes a while to develop a personal identity in music. Anyway.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I feel like it's super present in my music, super present in a lot of people's music. And it's like the idea of essentially just like, like you said, toolbox, I think is like the best way to put it. And I've heard a lot of people say that before, whether it be coming through compositionally or talking about even like improvisation, people talk about like
your toolbox of licks.
Yeah, exactly. You develop this repertoire of things that you kind of, like I know now I'm starting to like recognize like, oh, I always fall back on this in my playing and in composition now. It's like these are things that I kind of like fall back on.
Right.
And sometimes now it's like trying to push.
Maybe don't do that every time.
Yeah. It's like, how can I get around, like an open fifth? Like that's just like a go-to thing for me. And it's like it just sounds good pretty much all the time and like allows you to do a lot of things around it. Or like inverted pedals. Like there's just like a couple things that stand out to me that are just go-tos for me.
So we'll come back to your compositional style and all that kind of stuff. But so like what's your background like? Did you in a way what your parents do? Like do they hate that you're a musician in New York making no money?
Yeah, right. So basically, so I grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up in this place called Kenosha, which I actually found out this year is actually considered a suburb of Chicago, which is really weird because it's in Wisconsin.
The suburbs of Chicago are so widespread.
I know, it's insane.
And like so many people say they're from Chicago when it's weird. Like if someone who's from Chicago will be like, if you don't live like within Chicago proper, you're not from Chicago.
Yeah,
but like there's so many suburbs around.
It's so spread out too. It's like someone that's like 3 hours outside of Chicago.
I am from Chicago. I live in the south suburbs, but yes, I work in the city. I live in Chicago. Just shut the fuck up. Anyway, sorry.
Exactly.
But okay. So you're from Wisconsin, from Kenosha. Your parents are musicians?
Yeah. So my mom is a nurse practitioner. She works at the Cancer Center Treatment of America, which is she's an amazing person. Like the stuff that she deals with on a daily basis, like really puts things into perspective for what I'm doing.
What contractor wouldn't hire me for a gig?
Exactly.
She's like, well, someone was bleeding on me today.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like she deals with these super constantly, essentially like, not to get too heavy, but like kind of walking some people like to death's door, and like things like that. It's like, hopefully some of these people get better, but when you're going to somewhere like the Cancer Center Treatment of America, things are usually pretty dire. So, so talking to her about that, she just has like this like overwhelming ability of like illuminating positivity, which is, for all the things she's been through in her life, it's pretty amazing that she's able to do that. So she's a huge inspiration to me as far as like just kind of keeping my head up all the time. But she played cello when she was younger. My family's always been like very big supporters of the music community, and I think that I'm super thankful for that, because I think that has really helped me get to where I am today. And but really, no, I mean, like when I was growing up, they were supporters, but I don't think they ever thought about me actually going on to pursue it, So my mom was around, but my dad passed away when I was super young. He had cancer, and he was also a musician, but I know he played guitar. But other than that, like, it's an interesting thing, like when you grow up in a single parent household, because you kind of learn about. Like I learned about my dad through stories of other people.
How old were you when?
I was 6 weeks old.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, it was like my whole life. It's been pretty much, I was raised by like two single mothers. My godmom lived in the same house as us, and then my mom. So like my mom worked a ton, she was going to school and then like working two jobs while I was a baby. And so my grandparents stepped in to help too. That's
interesting, because like as musicians, like we're so steeped in the history of what we do.
Yeah.
And like, that's kind of, you live on these stories of people through your teacher, whoever.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
you live
for
on, you
sure.
grew up
Yeah.
musically on these stories of people who no longer alive, no longer producing, but you got an early jump on that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I know, right?
You
Yeah,
know,
man.
a little more personal.
yeah, but it's good though. It's like I think for me that it was something that like was really defined. I think probably still very defining of my character and who I am. Maybe not, and I'm sure it filters into my music. Obviously, I think that's going to be something that just naturally happens. But I think I was listening to something by like Louis C.K. where he was talking about something he was told, I think, by like, I don't know if it was Tom Malone or something like that, but some musician who was on like the Late Show or something like that, and Louis had asked him something about how he came up in his life and stuff like that, and he basically talked about how his mother, I think, was an addict and his dad was never around too. And he's like, well, how did you, like, you're a really successful musician, how you do that? And he's like, well, I kind of just like picked my role models. Like I kind of just like chose, like I just latched on to people to like teach me how to be a person in my life.
Oh, I mean, like not to get like super philosophical about it or psychoanalytical, if you will. But I mean, in that kind of situation, like you're forced to like find father figures for to teach you what it and like you kind of cherry pick
exactly.
And of course I mean you're already saying that like how much you love your mom and how much that's great has influenced you as a person, but at the same time you're still like kind of like where's that father figure in whatever thing that you choose.
Yeah, totally. And then, like it's funny because I think I just naturally when I get close to a teacher that I really admire and like I kind of let them in, then like I get super attached to them. Like like I get like very, very attached to them. Which might be like if they aren't into that, then it could be weird. But it's just like kind of a natural inkling of mine.
So then how did you start, musicking?
Yeah, so the music thing was definitely so like I said, my mom played cello, so when I in Kenosha they actually have a pretty solid music program, at least people putting money in the music program, people that actually care about it, so which is great. And so when I think I started playing cello when I was 4th grade, so however that age was, 9 10, something like that, something like that. I did that for a year and I think I liked it. I don't really remember, and then like I think I really wanted to play saxophone. My mom wanted me to play saxophone. Someone wanted me to play saxophone. I was not destined to play saxophone, so I went to go. They had like those days where it's like, come try your instrument.
Zoo,
so like I did that and I like went down and I tried to play saxophone. I think I tried to play like a couple other instruments, and then someone handed me a trombone. I think my teacher, this guy Ken Wheely, who handed me the trombone, and then it basically just became one of my like surrogate father figures like for like my whole, from like that point on to like when I graduated for high school. And he was amazing, man. He really did step in like a father to me. I mean, I got really close. Me and his son were also like the same age,
right?
So we became close. We kind of grew up together, and but that was kind of like it was like I started playing trombone, and I don't know how invested I was at the time, when you're in 5th grade, like, I don't know if you really can be that invested in really any. I was invested in video games. Remember that? I know that much.
Super invested.
I was pretty passionate about that. But that and like Dragon Ball Z, I think those might have been like
they're real art forms, guys.
So so I did that, and I would say like that. And then when I got into middle school, my nephew, my sister's 20 years older than I am. She has 4 kids and they're closer to my age.
Right. So
like my nephew, how old is he right now? He's got to be 29 now. Boy, it's crazy. And so he's going to be 29. Yeah. He was always like really into punk and like rock and metal and just like anything like heavier kind of. That was like his go-to. And it just happened to be like, for whatever reason, the Kenosha, Wisconsin had like a very vibrant like
Punk metal,
punk and metal scene,
thrash
man,
metal,
like that, and like ska. It's like just like those things. Like they just really like. There's a lot of these bands, and it's like I remember someone recently just like posted like they had all the sound files from like all these bands when I had when I was growing up, and they were like, "Hey, I made this thing," and like it's like all the bands from Kenosha from like this time to this time, like and it's like all these like 14 to like 18-year-olds.
Was it
like
terrible?
Man, some of it's really good. It's crazy. It's like some of it's like because with punk, it's like it's more an aesthetic thing, It's
Then,
like it's very much more like getting the emotional like affectation across without like the pretension of some other music, And not saying that that's always the best thing, and it's not everyone's thing, but
and it's like that time period, like. And the Midwest is sometimes like smaller towns in the Midwest is sometimes a little behind on some of these things.
That's very
so
true,
like, so you've got your punk, metal, grunge stuff filtering through a little later.
Yeah, that's true. Because this would have been like late '90s, early 2000s.
You've got all these kids like, I hate the Midwest. I need an outlet.
Yeah, man. It was So there was definitely that, but it was a lot of like going to shows when I was younger and checking out punk and stuff like that. I think that was a big thing. And so that was like...
Did you start playing trombone in these groups?
I think by the time I was in high school, that was when I actually started playing trombone in like ska bands, more like ska punk bands. Yeah. And that was really great. There were a few groups that like kind of took a lot of the more, I guess, proficient musicians and like got them in. And it's like really weird. It's like a lot of these guys, like, it's like, they're kind of like the dudes that are doing a lot of cool things still in like the Midwest. Like I got a lot of friends that like were also in some of these ska bands that are now like professional musicians in Chicago or in Milwaukee. So,
well, that's like a good, that's a good way, like starting out in that kind of situation. Like I part of me wishes that I had done that kind of thing when I was in high school, because it prepares you better for the lifestyle of like hustling and doing whatever for 25, 50, $75, like,
yeah, it's
in New York, like, cause if you can, if you're not that specific trad jazz or orchestra or opera, if you're not on those specific tracks, like, okay, I'll play with a ska band this day, and then I'll play with a big band this day, and then I'll play an orchestra gig this day. Like it kind of,
you're a lot more flexible in what you're doing. And then just like I think I've always just been interested in a lot of different types of music, which still is very true. And I think that maybe some of that did, and some of it did come with just like growing up in a household with, because like I said, my sister's 20 years older than me, so a lot of when I was growing up, my house was like, it's kind of like 3 floors. So it's like me and like my mom and my nephew would live on the first floor. And then it was like my godmom and her son, who's a lot older. I think basically by the time I was probably like in elementary school, he had already moved out to Colorado. But then the 3rd floor was either like my grandparents. They would be there like a lot of times in the summer. They lived in like Tucson, Arizona for the rest of the time. Except for when I was really young, then they were around. Or my sister with her kids.
So you've got like 3 floors of different kinds of music.
Yeah, so it's like yeah, exactly. So like my sister's a huge like Deadhead, which is like, like the, whatever you say. And like Dave Matthews and all that kind of stuff. Basically like hippie, like stoner music.
Fish?
Yeah, like Fish. I think she was way more like Dead than she was Fish. But so she was into that. And like, but then like also like Hendrix and all that stuff. And then my godmom was like, so into hard rock, like she got me into like some of the best shit, man. Like we listened, like she also got me playing video games when I was young. She like played, we used to sit down and like play Super Mario Brothers 3 and stuff, and like she'd watch like cartoons with me in the morning and stuff when she wasn't working. But anyways, like she would like, on the radio would be like Pink Floyd would be on, or like the Rolling Stones or the Doors, or like again like Hendrix or someone like that. And then my mom was kind of just like totally different from that. She like listened to stuff, but she was super into folk. She like always would talk about how she was like flower power person back in like
so
the
you've
60s,
got your
70s.
Dylan and your Baez.
Yeah, so she was more into like the folk stuff, and then like also just like really into like Native American traditional music, which was, it's kind of weird, like a random thing, but interesting. So we like a lot of like road trips going to visit my grandparents and stuff. That would be like the soundtrack would be like Native American like pan music and stuff like that, flute music and stuff. Yeah.
So that's not unusual, I guess. But a very eclectic musical education, in your household, and then you're going and doing all these, these other things.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe a little more current, but that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So it was all just like a mishmash of stuff, man. And I think then then I started playing in a jazz band. And once you like kind of start playing in that stuff, and I think if you have good teachers that teach it to you in the right way, I think it becomes a lot more approachable and accessible. Obviously, if you have someone who's like drilling you on like certain things at a very young age, sometimes it's not the best way to go about it as a kid.
These are your blues scales. You must learn them all right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Like then these are the only things you can do.
Yeah. So like I remember, I think one of the first things that my teacher did in high school when I was, I guess, like starting to get more into jazz was he had us like, kind of typically so, but in one of maybe the best records to buy was Go Good Kind of Blue. And he had us like learn Miles Davis's So Off, So What, like scatting it though, and I still remember, man. I remember sitting there playing Final Fantasy X, like with the volume down, like completely down, just like grinding, and just listening to Kind of Blue in the background, and just like doing that for like I would just put it on repeat and just like listen to it over and over and again. And I still feel like that's probably maybe one of the jazz records I know best, like, right? Because it was one of my first exposures to that and stuff like that. I mean, I think I've listened to a lot of like random big band music, just like off like random collections that my mom had, or random Frank Sinatra stuff and Patsy Cline stuff that my grandparents had. So, but yeah, it's just been a very eclectic bunch of music that I've kind of been exposed to and interested in.
So when you when you went off to school, were you studying trombone or were you studying composition?
Yeah, so trombone was
okay.
And I originally I think I went into school wanting to do jazz, and then at Lawrence they didn't allow you to get a jazz degree. That wasn't like a thing you could do. You basically had to have all your classical stuff like down, and then like your junior or senior year, that's when they allowed you to like focus more on whatever you wanted to focus on. So I think I remember getting to a point at Lawrence where I was like, all right, like this jazz thing is like very open-ended and like there's really no like cutoff point to like how well you can learn a tune and stuff like that. And I remember that was pretty daunting to me at the time. So I think there was literally like a period of at least like 6 months where I was like orchestral excerpts all day. Like that's all I'm doing. And like, cause I was like, I felt like at least with these, there's like an attainable goal. And even if that goal is to just like play them as well as I can, like over and over and over again. Yeah. That was still like a goal. But
it's specific notes on a page. Yeah. And you don't like, I mean, there's no end point as far as like playing them well. Like there's no like, oh, you don't ever have to do this again. Yeah. But it's not like, learning, let's say like Stella by Starlight. Yeah. Very, not traditional, but like a tune that everyone's done and in a million different ways. But there's no like, this is how you do it. This is this is specifically how you do it. No, there's how J.J. Johnson did it. Yeah. But then there's how whoever else did it.
Like, and it's also like J.J. did it like 50 different ways.
Exactly. Like there's no like finally, okay, I've got it. Yeah. I've completed the jazz.
So yeah, exactly. So it's like that. I remember just like at some point I was just like really fed up with that. And I don't know if that's like necessarily the best word, but it was making it less fun for me. And music to me really needed to be fun. And it still really needs to be fun. And sometimes that's something I'd struggle with. I think most people probably struggle with that on a day-to-day.
It's easy to, especially when you're just like hustling and like trying to do as much as possible. It's really easy to lose, like, because you're so not overwhelmed, but just like so busy and it's, I've got this thing this night, I've got this thing this night. This night I have two different things. I'm going to be running from one to the other. Like it's very hard to like take a beat and stop and be like, this is awesome. Yeah. And especially as like younger musicians, sometimes it's not awesome. You're making a little bit of money. You're making a little bit of money to do something, but it's just kind of like, well, I'm doing this because I need the money, but
otherwise, like maybe I wouldn't be doing this specific thing. Yeah. but yeah, like there is that, and I try to remain positive. I think, like being optimistic, and it's super easy to get dark. Like, and it's like an easy path to go down.
And it's so often that like, especially I would say, especially on orchestra gigs, like ones that aren't as good, maybe like half the time break is like you'll hang out with your friends, the people that you know in the orchestra or whatever, the band or whatever, and you'll be like, oh God, stand partner killing me, or this conductor. A lot of times I've bonded with so many people over complaining about conductors.
Yeah, that's
like but like that's like it's good to bond with people, but that's kind of an unhealthy way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
all you're talking about how much you hate a person or hate something.
Yeah, man, like that's been something I've been trying to get better at, and I think and it is like that whole thing of like bonding over like someone with something that like is a negative experience, rather than like just being like, well, we got to like play music today.
Yeah.
Like but like bonding, but it's really easy to be like, man, like, this fucking guy doesn't know what he's like doing up on the podium. Like, what is happening? I don't understand what's going on. Like, or like when someone like has you rehearse for something and it's like, okay, like you really didn't need us here for this 2 hours when
you're paying us $25.
Yeah. And like, and then also like you only are maybe like we play 15 minutes, that's, I think a lot of people have had that experience, and that's a stressful experience to have. And like, that's been interesting for me as a band leader, because, I've been a band leader elsewhere. Like Lawrence, I had a little band together, but it definitely felt a little bit more distributed. I was definitely like a lot of times the person that would organize a lot of the things, but I think everyone kind of definitely had a hand in what was going on. But to be out here now, it's like, at Lawrence, there was like, those are people that I was pretty connected with. Like I hung out with on the day to day. Like this band got formed when I was a sophomore, so I already had a lot of those relationships kind of like formed.
But in New York, you're like grabbing people.
Yeah, you're kind of
you like, oh, I just met you. Hey, come play.
Yeah,
in my
I got
group.
this thing, and it's especially like when you don't have access to, my band has a flute and an oboist, and it's like when you don't have access to a flute or an oboe player, because as a jazz person, that's not very often that is the case.
And maybe you don't want to use someone from Steinhardt.
Yeah, it just, you never really know, man. And it's like, so it's just like trying to reach out to those people and see just like, okay, I hope this works. It's like a roll of the dice thing. And then on top of that, then trying to be like, okay, I'm trying to be sensitive to like everyone's feelings, but this is also like my music, and I want to like make it come across well. But then I also want this to be like a supportive like band environment.
Right.
There's just like so many interesting things that go into having your own band, but like also trying to like, it's your, like I said, like again, it comes down to the whole name thing, like it's my band, but I'd rather have it be more of a band mentality where it's like kind of everyone's ownership of this thing. That would be the ideal place to get to, but it's hard to get to that place until I think everyone's getting money and everyone's kind of like
bought
into it. Yeah. Like and I'm hoping that eventually that this group kind of gets to that point.
It's funny, like when you talk about that kind of thing, it's very, very hard when you're not paying people.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like, things like with Sarah's band, she doesn't pay anyone, but like she still is able to get 23 people together, something like that, because when it comes down to it, her music's good.
Yeah, people love the music. I mean, that's like, I love playing in the band. I always have a really fucking good time playing in that band.
Exactly. Like, I mean, and exactly. So it's like it's that weird thing. Like some people can do it, and you'll get people even if you're not paying them.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your group and like how you kind of started to put it together.
Yeah.
Your unnamed Chris Misch project.
Yeah. So it really started, like I said, I wrote. So NYU has this thing where they basically wanted every single master's student to produce a CD by the time they graduate, which is great. I think that's a very real thing that people should kind of have to do.
And they have like really good recording facilities.
I mean, there's some things with the recording facilities that are kind of a pain in the ass to deal with.
I've heard.
But like.
But when it comes down to it, they have really good facilities as long as you book them a year in advance.
Yeah. So they basically, since they have that project, it was kind of like, I knew once I had kind of figured out the ensemble that I wanted to work with, it was kind of just like starting to write the music.
Yeah.
And I didn't even have anyone really in mind to play it. And it was like, if I have enough music, then I'll just form a band.
Well, then, your the ensemble or the instrumentation for your band is unusual. You already mentioned that you have a flute and an oboe player. So what you obviously have trombone, you have trumpet.
Yeah, so it's the full kind of thing is like the flute, oboe, then it's saxophone, bass, clarinet, trumpet, trombone, 2 pianos, like an electric piano, and then an actual piano, if I could get it, and then bass and drums. It's the full ensemble. And like I said, that just came a lot down with the combination of, again, having like I guess being kind of influenced by like wind quintets or just a lot of contemporary classical music that uses a lot of those instruments in cool ways. I'm a huge fan of Y Music. Y Music is a ridiculous band, and they play with a lot of cool people. And they have bass, clarinet, flute, trumpet hookup that I think sounds awesome.
And it's cool. Like you can, even though you have primarily a jazz background, like if you have an unusual ensemble like that, like you can, like new music composers will want to write for something unusual that allows them a lot of different playthings, if you will. A new music composer might never write for a big band, but they'll write for an ensemble that's trumpet, trombone, flute, oboe, bass, clarinet, saxophone. Like they'll write for that because there's a lot of different possibilities sonically.
Yeah, and that's like something for me that's like, as a composer, that's what excites me the most too, is kind of like writing for more for me. I like more possibilities in orchestration. Yeah, it's like the more ability of like combining different instruments for a unique timbre. That's something for me that's really, really amazing thing that that kind of like also inspired this ensemble, I guess.
So like when you were putting it together, were people like, what?
Yeah.
Why are you asking? What are you asking for?
Yeah. So I think it was kind of, I got on the music, and I remember I think it was probably the end of last year that I brought in a bunch of the stuff. I think we had like the summer break or whatever. And then I had brought in all the music to Alan, and I was like, all right, I think I have like everything done. And then like Alan kind of like, I played a bunch of the stuff that I had just finished for him, and he was like, nope. Like, like he's like, you gotta do better. You gotta like flush some of this stuff out. He's like, all these have really great ideas. Yeah. Like these are all really well constructed and stuff, but it's just like some of them, they doesn't really make sense how like this gets to this. And then there isn't a lot of transitional material. And I'm super happy you said that, like
too much of this big idea. These big ideas don't relate.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, so much of him saying that, and it was really like to me, that was like a big moment. And I think for him, it was really just like, well, like you've got to do this. Like, it was fine, but for me, it was like, oh man, he just crushed my soul. Like, but it really, I mean, it inspired me to like go on and do some more stuff and kind of write that. So then after that, I had been talking to a few people and been like, hey, like have some music. I'd be interested in doing a reading session. The only real person, I had like a few people that like I knew that I wanted to do it, which were guys that I played with, like my friend Brian Courage, who went to undergrad with me. I knew I wanted him on bass because he had just moved to New York. And I was like, we have a lot of the same influences. Like we're both super into Fred's son, Ike Sturm, who's the leader of the jazz at St. Peter's. He's the musical director there. And we both like, his first CD was like one of the most inspirational things to me as a composer and as just a jazz musician. I really, really love his first album called Spirit. And so Brian's also super into that. That was Brian's teacher also, was Ike. So I knew he was going to be in the band. He was like really kind of the only one that I knew was definitely going to be in the band though. And then it was kind of just like making connections with people at NYU, eventually kind of like making some connections outside of NYU. But the initial like band kind of formed around people that I had played in ensembles with or, different things like that. So, and then people that were just into it. I mean, my main worry about it initially was initially the thinking of like, oh, like some people won't like this, and eventually I got over that and it was like, you just got to keep calling people. But it's cause like, I was really into like, I don't want people to join this band who will say to my face that they like it,
and then
but then like
about it.
yeah, complain about it, or just don't really like it, because I think, which I know, and like I get, man, because like especially when like we're talking about like hustling and stuff like that, when you're hustling and you're trying to just like find some more sustainable kind of money coming in or something like that, but then there's more, I guess, maybe more of a reason to do that. But
and you got to find people that people who believe in what you're doing will commit. Yeah, even if, like I said, even if there's not monetary compensation at the moment, like. Yeah. You find people who are into it, they'll commit, they'll show up every time, you can rely on them. Like when you have some people who might be kind of into it, like then it's harder to like pin them down for a regular kind of thing. They'll come in and play a show, sure, but
yeah, exactly. And that was kind of what the next process was kind of working with those people, got the band together, basically got people that seemed really into it. And I think are really into it, you know, like there's definitely people that have put their time in on those parts, because a lot of this stuff isn't easy.
Composers.
Yeah, I know, right? And it's like, it's so funny because it's just one of those things that, you know, I wrote all this music and you don't really realize how hard it is, like, especially when you don't play those instruments. Right. It's like I wrote a bunch of stuff in a few of the piano charts that is like, it looks not that hard because it's not like, you know, 64th note like runs and stuff like that, which actually probably on piano is probably easier than maybe what I think. But it's like a lot of this like polyrhythmic, like the left hand's doing like some kind of grouping and the right hand's doing like a grouping that's completely different. Right. And then like also they're moving, and that stuff I realized I'm like, oh, I guess that's really hard, because I was thinking a lot of like, well, drummers can do that, you know, like drummers do that kind of stuff all the time. So I was thinking like
not so much.
Yeah. No, it's like in my head I was like, oh, it's like the same thing. They like have to learn like, you know, limb independence and stuff like that, just like drummers do. But I think it's not as often that they have to do a lot of like, you know, polyrhythmic stuff. As intricate. You know?
And then it's usually less intricate when there's polyrhythmic stuff in solo piano music. Not only is it not as tight and intricate as much, at least in older piano music. Bartok, you're gonna, but it's also when you're playing by yourself, like you can kind of fiddle with it.
Yeah, exactly. So that was basically it. That was kind of finding the members, and now kind of like recorded the CD. And
well, what, you know, did you find yourself having to, you know, we're talking about like writing and this kind of idea of not always being sure of what's too hard or what is, you know, what works, what's idiomatic, etc. Did you find yourself having to change a lot of stuff once you got like live musicians doing it?
You know, honestly, no.
Oh, that's nice.
Which was great. Yeah. And I mean, like, because I had, you know, the composition lessons that I did have, that definitely helped. I think there was definitely moments where I maybe would have written something that was a little bit weird.
And he was like, nah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and plus there's a difference between stupid hard and like rewarding hard. Yeah. Like sometimes you play, like when I was at Manus, I would play on these, you know, student composer readings, and they would the people would listen, you know, the teachers would get together and like pick these specific pieces from these specific student composers, and the orchestra would play them. And like some of them would sound kind of cool, but you're like, this doesn't make sense. Like it just doesn't work. But then, you know, so it's like stupid hard, like hard because it's not well written. Yeah. But then you have something like John Williams. If you play those original orchestra parts, they're really hard. Yeah. But it's worth it because it's good. Like you're like, okay, I'll sit in my practice room for 45 minutes and work on Star Wars because it's a good part. You know, there's like a weird balance between that, like, you know.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like, it's funny to say that. So because at Lawrence, I was in this composition class. I think we started writing more music towards like the end of our time there. Some of my friends and stuff. And one of my really close friends, who I think is a great composer, but he's a percussionist too. He would write really hard stuff and rhythmically, and just like lots of big leaps for the trombone and stuff, and lots of like these different things that definitely made me a way better musician. Like I am so thankful that like so many people had me read crazy mixed meter stuff when I was an
Right.
undergrad, like
Yeah.
constantly, man. Like there's something about Lawrence, like they are really big on orchestral music, but they're so big on new music, which is is becoming more popular. But like it's crazy that like this random school in the Midwest is such a huge proponent of new music. You know, like it's like a lot of the faculty there are people that's how they make a lot of their money, is doing new music stuff. And so I'm happy that I kind of got that exposure, because it made being out here and having to read charts like that that much easier. And when I'm writing, kind of like also being like, okay, like I've seen music like this before, which means like it's
They
doable.
can do it.
Yeah.
There's also like a weird thing, like throughout the past centuries, you know, advances in musical performance have been made because composers wrote something that was too hard, like that wasn't possible or had never been done before, and then it becomes commonplace. Like the most common example would be the bassoon solo at the beginning of Rite of Spring. That.
Yeah.
Like no one had done that before. And you're starting on a really high note, and it's very thin. Like, that really hadn't been accessed in the bassoon rep as much, but now it's commonplace. If a bassoonist can't nail that 100 times out of 100, they're not going. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
But so of course you have to be careful, because that can give you license. You have to make sure you don't let that give you license to do something stupid.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of it, for the stuff that I was writing, it's more hard through like rhythmic thing. I don't think any of the parts are like particularly like, oh man, like for like, something the opening of the Red Spring. But I think they're more just like maybe some like the classical musicians that are reading these charts, and now there's like, instead of just like everyone's kind of playing these more typical phrasing and stuff like that, all of a sudden like the drummer's playing, like on the third triplet of like every second beat, and like I'm supposed to be, someplace else on the beat and stuff like that. Maybe like for some classical musicians, like that constant like gyration of just all these different stuff, like things happening around them at the same time, is kind of confusing and a little bit hard to like lock into where one is, even. So
then like what, who do you kind of count as, there's going to be, we'll have music, some of your music on the end of this, on the end of the show, but like what kind of things like have you combined, like from who and from what, to make what you do?
Yeah. So, I feel like one of the biggest things that's kind of hilarious about the music is there's like, we actually like joked about calling it the Legend of the Hidden Backbeat for a period of time, because it's like literally in like every single song like that I've written ever, there's like some kind of like backbeat like somewhere in there.
Where is it?
Yeah, it's like where is it? It's like okay, it's like in the oboe part like this time, and it's just like it's just there, and I think a lot of that comes from listening to a lot of different stuff, but like probably a lot of like hip hop. Which is something that I think is a very big part of what I listen to now, and makes up kind of like a lot of my vocabulary at this point. And that's, I don't even know, I know exactly where I got my start listening to hip hop, but what made me like all of a sudden just like grow to love it. I don't know exactly when that happened.
Yeah.
And I still listen to a lot of other stuff too. I would say that as far as like the groove part of it, I'd say a lot of that comes from like hip hop or like prog rock and metal,
It's interesting, like speaking specifically about hip hop, like for years and years, that was kind of just something that was really separate. And as within the hip hop community, particularly as more these artists come along who combine more and more different things. I mean, you listen to like guys like if you listen to Biggie, like, yeah, he has some instrumental things, I'll just stick with that example. But like or Dre or like whoever, you've got these instrumental things, but they're all synth, and that kind of thing. And then you move, sampling has always been a huge part of hip hop, but then like, Kanye started taking it more in a different direction. Like, obviously, this is being like super, super like glossing over so many artists who have done so many interesting things. But, you listen to guys like Kanye, and even more recently, Frank Ocean, Kendrick Lamar, they're doing all of these kind of things that, yeah, it's hip hop, Even Drake to some extent. I'm not a huge Drake fan, but like he does his thing, and like you bring in all these elements to create this kind of new hip hop language, and and now it's kind of filtering back the other way. You have more and more classical jazz ensembles who are pulling that back around into what they do, and over the past few years, it's been so much more prevalent. More traditional musicians are like, well, I want hip hop. I want like these elements. I want all of these different elements in my music, as opposed to sticking in your lane.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of it's just like the time that we grew up. I think a big part of it. We have so much access to all that stuff. Hip hop. People say '90s hip hop was like the golden era of hip hop, which everyone has their own different opinion of that.
As far as influence, sure. Like like no one's gonna ever. I mean, people aren't gonna be like, oh well. These guys are all better than Biggie and Tupac, because like you'll get laughed at, but but there is so much different kind of interesting stuff that was influenced by them, but has taken all these different elements. Yeah,
it's like I mean, all different types of music kind of like face a similar trajectory. If you like, you like kind of microscope zoom in on certain things,
right.
You kind of have similar patterns. I've heard people say that Biggie and Tupac are kind of like the Charlie and Dizzy of the hip hop world. So which is kind of like interesting, but I would mainly just like, as far as like all these people, younger people, or even like, people in 30s, 40s writing or making music, I think a lot of it does come from just like, okay, like I didn't grow up listening to jazz as much as I did grow up listening, like I said, to all punk and all that stuff like that. So it's like that had a big sometimes a bigger influence on me, and maybe even just aesthetically than musically. But
yeah, sometimes it's more about the not ambiance, but like the attitude of specific styles rather than actual physical influence, like note influences.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a lot of bands that are just composers that are doing that now, where it's like, you can hear that they were super influenced by, maybe Rick James or someone like that, like at like a very specific time, Thundercat is a good example of someone who's just like kind of very much influenced by like the whole like parliamentary funkadelic thing, but then like also clearly is doing some crazy things with like jazz phrasing and stuff, but then also plays in a thrash metal band. So there's like he's a good example where a lot of people are now becoming hip to him, which is awesome. I think it's really great, and it's cool, and it's allowing for kind of like a new kind of originality through like just the combination of like borrowing ideas from a bunch of different places,
right?
And like whatever you're influenced by, which I think is cool. I think that's a good thing,
and it helps. It helps widen your sphere of influence, or a sphere of people who might like what you're doing, without, But if you're doing it well, it's not like you're selling out. In previous generations, it might have been seen as selling out, but now it's kind of like, well, no, I just want people to like what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's more authentic. I mean, it's just a lot more authentic. I think it's more just like, it's not doing it because you're trying to connect with people. You are trying to connect with people regardless, but I think it's more just doing it because it's what you hear, which is, I think for a lot of musicians, is the goal,
right?
And if that connects with people, then that's, I think, also a good goal to have.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. So you recorded this album a while ago, but you're just now doing like promoting it and like telling people.
yeah. So it kind of just came down. I think we recorded it back in April of this past year, and it was super stressful. I mean, it's a 9-track album, and we did it. I think we basically recorded in 8 hours, and we did everything live. And so like, there's definitely like moments of like, oh well, that could have went better, but it's good enough, And I think. Both thanks to like the musicians that were performing on it for putting the time into the music, but then also like thanks to the engineer that recorded it, and also thanks to Sam, the production guy in the project, Sam Monet, who did an awesome job, because he kind of like I kind of just let him do his thing, and he kind of just like did everything I wanted him to do without me saying. So it was like, all right, you get it, man. This is what I wanted to do. Yeah. So that was awesome. But yeah, and then it was kind of just like I was gonna put it out like so many times, but then I had like I had all these different like bugs in my ear, kind of like people just like being like, don't put it out yet, like wait, like build up press, like do all this stuff, and then like some people would be like, no, just put it out, like who fucking cares, it's
well, I mean, you have it recorded, it's not going to be the last thing you ever do. The thing is like once you do an official drop of something, like you can promote it and perform stuff off of it, but like once it's officially out, like the clock starts ticking on when you need to start project. Doing something else. Like it's, and that can be, I heard a guy who used to write at Spin magazine back in the early 2000s. He always, whenever he talks, and he's a TV critic now, but he still like talks, he knows all these knows these bands from the mid 2000s because he did stories on a lot of them. And he, when he interviews some of them, he'll talk about like, you have your entire life to release that first album or movie or whatever the project is, but then you only have a limited time to release that second one. Like all of your life experiences go into that first thing, and then like you have to figure something else out.
Yeah, man, and I do think that's pretty true. And because that was even my thinking when I was working on this album, and it was kind of just like my thinking was like, all right, I'm gonna flex all the things that I know and just put them in this one fucking thing, and hopefully it works. Hopefully there would be one track that like someone connects with, and maybe it's like one of the more like indie rock pop ones, or maybe it's one of the more like contemporary classical ones. Who knows? But like hopefully that connects with someone in a certain way, and that was kind of like the goal. I mean, the overall so the album's gonna be called or is called Snapshots, which is essentially like kind of capturing that. It's that whole idea of like, these are my kind of like almost like capturing how similar how like snapshots are memories essentially. It's like people talk about how creating composition is something like you encapsulating an experience either of your own or like trying to capture a feeling or an emotion from like a specific thing that you read or something, like it's capturing an experience and it's kind of documenting that in a way. So that was kind of my goal with the album, was to kind of tackle my own experiences in the album, but then also like comment on, this is how I've lived, like these are the things I'm influenced in, this is what I'm into. And I think that whole like I guess imagery of snapshots was kind of made the most sense to me in that framework.
Yeah, no, that's yeah. I mean, anything like it's like you can call whatever an album or a diary or kind of like this is me. Hey,
exactly.
What's up, guys? This is what I do. This is what I've been doing. That's so the release show is on December 11th. Right. Correct. Okay. And it's, where is it? Remind me where it is.
It's going to be at Come On Everybody, which is in Bed-Stuy, off the G train.
Come on, man. Off the G train, what are you doing?
I know everyone that's like not in Brooklyn is like, oh God, why did you have it there? Like
so much Uber time right now. Gonna be happening.
So we'll see what happens. But it's earlier in the night, it's like we got the whole Friday night slot, which is great. We got from 8 to 11. Yeah. Which is I'm pretty excited about.
Cool. So that's going to be stuff from the album, but also other stuff you've written since then.
Yeah. So we've been playing a couple new things that, one new piece of mine and then one new piece of this guy, Ethan Helm, who's a saxophonist, really great composer and saxophonist. And he was generous enough to give us a piece. So we'll probably be doing that. But my friend Rory, who goes under like the moniker Milo, he just put out an album recently called So the Flies Don't Come. And it's really, I think it's an incredible album. And it definitely like lends itself to kind of being adapted for a band, like a live ensemble, more so than because some instrumental hip hop or just hip hop in general, the instrumentals can be very, very loop based to the point where it's like to make a band do that, although it's cool, can be kind of torturous, you know. And this stuff, like some of it is like that, but I think enough of it is not like that, where it kind of allows for cool pairings and textures again. Also, like the producer who did it, Kenny Siegel, is like used oboe on a few of the tracks, and that was to me, I was like, this is like it's meant to be, you know.
So let's do this, man.
Yeah, so we're basically doing that whole album. So it'll be this guy Hemlock Ernst, who is another rapper from Baltimore, who is this guy named Sam T. Herring, who's the lead singer of this band called Future Islands. So it'll be him opening, which is awesome that he's willing to do that. And then us going on second, the band, my band, going on second with basically performing the album almost front to back. I don't know if we'll do the whole thing, but we'll do the majority of it.
Right.
And then I've been writing all the arrangements to the Milo stuff, which has been what this whole month has been, which has been a lot.
Yeah.
So I still have to I think I'm basically on the last one. So I'm going to go home after this and kind of finish that up.
Cool.
Which would be awesome. But yeah, then it's just kind of it's lucky. I'm super lucky because Rory's going to be in town and we're going to be able to rehearse with him, because he's living in Milwaukee right now.
Given.
Yeah, exactly. It's especially we used to be in this band in undergrad together, and it was we would always record everything on Zooms and send it to the guys, and they would write verses on their way up to for the show and stuff, and which is not ideal, but yeah. So it's gonna be nice where you have a full week of being able to rehearse with him, and for me to him to be able to talk over everything that he wants and stuff, which will I think lead to a very relaxed and fun show overall. Yeah, so I'm excited for it. Really excited for it.
Cool. Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, man. Well, Chris, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah,
I
no
really,
thanks for
really
having me on.
appreciate it. Yeah, and yeah.
Thanks, man.